Ken Rosenthal reporting going on foul territory that teams maybe are going to want to see a little more from Sandy than what they're seeing now. Yes, Sandy's healthy, but there are points maybe he's not looking the sharpest. We see his last couple outings, maybe not the Sandy of old. Nate, I want to hear from you about Sandy. Trade rumors are we're going to hear up until the trade deadline. If it's a situation where he's not going to get traded up until that deadline, or maybe he's more of a Luis Arraez type deal where maybe he's going to get traded maybe in the early parts of the season.
I mean, I definitely think it's valid that other teams want to see more from Sandy. I mean, they're going to give up a huge haul for him. So especially with an ace like him, you definitely want to make sure you're getting at least a B or A version of Sandy. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I think he's still just shaking off rust. I mean, 4 walks. He's still struggling with command a little bit. Not as sharp as usually is. Even not as sharp as we saw in spring training, going deeper into games for the first time in almost 2 years. So it made sense. I honestly think that it's going to be drawn out past the deadline just to make sure, or not past the deadline, but up until the deadline, just to make sure that, like I said, teams know what they're getting with Sandy and they're getting a version that, can lead them to a playoff push or push them deep in the playoffs. So I think it's going to be drawn out. Get ready for all the talks. It's going to be a while. But I say as of now, I've been wanting to keep Sandy. So that's just my opinion. But we'll have to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, Isaac, with Sandy there, what would you like to see more from Sandy? Up and coming, where he may potentially be traded. What's the perfect deal for Sandy? Because this is again ace of a rotation, a guy again coming off TJ, but has a team friendly contract. What can he even propose for this? It has to be multiple top prospects, 3-4 players. Like, what would even happen to be able to get Sandy?
This is a weird one. This is a very weird. From what I've heard, if it were up to Peter Bendix and company, I think this trade would happen sooner rather than later. I think that there's some hesitation coming from up top from the ownership. I think that Bruce Sherman knows that if he presses approve on this trade, it will be unlike any trade that they've done under this ownership group. So I think that's sort of what's holding things up. I think other teams do want to wait and see what exactly they are getting. They have so many years of control left with Sandy Alcantara, so maybe that doesn't make the Marlins need to do this right now. But I think if it were up to Peter Bendix, I think they would do it in the same timeline as the Luis Arraez trade went down as well. When it comes to what it would take, a name I know I was talking with some guys, some other reporters last time I was there. It would take a Roman Anthony type guy. I think they're gonna go for quality over quantity this time around. I know they didn't do that with the Tanner Scott deal. They didn't really do that with the Luis Arraez. Actually, in my opinion, they did. But I think it's gonna be a top 10 overall major league prospect. That's what they're gonna be going for. I think with the Cubs, they wanted Casey, but I don't think that's enough for Luzardo. They wanted that, but I think for Sandy, it's gonna take a hell of a lot more, given that it's 3 years at a very efficient deal. But the name I heard was it's going to have to be something like Roman Anthony. I don't know if the Red Sox would do that, but it's going to be an interesting one for sure. I don't think they would, but it's going to take something crazy like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a tricky part here because his status, like he's an icon sort of around the Marlins, and he has this aura around him even across the league. And I think the return is going to be underwhelming to at the end of the day, depending on how he performs. I mean, maybe he really fully taps back into 2022 form and forces an irrational decision. But otherwise, the caliber of prospect that might be valued the same as Sandy under these conditions, those prospects just don't get traded simply because of how efficient they are when they make it to the big leagues and how cost efficient they are. Even if it's a fair on paper value, those guys are simply untouchable. And Sandy he's touchable because of the team's current situation and how questionable they are competitive wise, even though it's an improved farm system, not an elite farm system at this moment. And the temptation that you have this piece that could make a really meaningful jump in terms of the caliber of talent that you have under control, that would all actually be on the same timeline. Whereas Sandy is just a little bit off the timeline of everybody else because of how long he's been around in the majors to this point. So this is obviously a story that we got to continue following as the season goes on. I've always leaned towards the fact that it's going to go pretty close to the deadline, especially now that the team has given themselves a little bit of cushion before they're totally embarrassing and out of the race. But even in between, to establish themselves to engage as many teams as they possibly can, even though there are some obvious landing spots now. The longer you wait, the more teams inevitably are going to have either injuries or underperformance in their rotation. That there's just going to be so many teams involved with that. And they're going to have leverage going down to the wire. So the risk, of course, is that he gets hurt
Right.
at that time of year, because Luzardo was somebody that they thought they could have gotten a lot in return for last summer, and he has a year that's just derailed by injury, even if it's not a long-term concern. So it's a tough spot, but thankfully he has such a long track record prior to this, and his upside is pretty obvious if he's simply available. That I do think this is going to be something that hangs over the team pretty deep into July.
Yeah, I want to hear from R made a face there right when Isaac mentioned Roman Anthony. Just for you, what's the package for Sandy look like? What does the team have to give up, or what the Marlins do you think are potentially looking for?
Well, and I totally get it. I would be asking for the same thing, but also I think that actually came up in the Just Baseball show, where I think Peter just asked me, theoretically, would you, if you were on the Red Sox side, trade Roman Anthony for him? And I said no. And there's very few. He might be the only prospect in all of baseball that I would say that about. How many teams are in a position where they can reasonably meet that price and not absolutely destroy their farm system? The obvious and brutal answer is the Dodgers. The Dodgers can make it to where you just can't say no. I think the Cubs could put together still a really, really good package, but that would be the opposite of what Isaac was saying, which would be more quantity over. I don't want to say quality because it's still really good quality, but you're not getting that quote unquote can't miss prospect. So there's not a lot of teams that have a blue chip prospect that they couldn't use quite soon. And I look at the D-backs; they don't really need to load it up, but you need a Jordan Lawler type of situation where he's in a lot of package where we don't need him, we just locked up Perdomo. There's not a lot of situations like that in Major League Baseball because, as Eli had mentioned, you take the opportunity to have 6 years of control of a player that can impact you. So my question to you guys is, because I think you guys have a better pulse on the team in general and stuff like that, is if Sandy's throwing pretty well and the team is playing pretty well, he does have 2 more years of control after this. So do you, if nothing comes across, do you just take that underwhelming deal, or do you let him pile up 180 innings this year and then see how it goes going into the next season, because you got 2 more years?
Yeah, I mean, if he gets on pace to be throwing 180, 200 innings in July, some team is going to be desperate. And I think if you wait till the end of the season, in the offseason, you might get a lot, but I usually tend to be in favor of trading when teams are desperate. Another team that I want to throw at you would be the Mariners. It's sort of a similar situation to the Cubs, where you may not have that top 10 overall prospect, but they could put together a pretty decent package. But to answer your question, we did this in the roundtable, which what would we do with Sandy Alcantara? I think there's no way that the Marlins are being competitive in the next 2 years. You might as well get everything you can, unless the offer really is underwhelming, like you said. But I would be on the side of trading him as soon as possible.
Yeah, I want to hear from.
I was just going to say, the tough part with that is the optics, and I understand why ownership wouldn't want to do that, because he does kind of have a different gravity to him than really anybody else on this team does. And I do wonder that if this team just can surprise enough and hang around 75 wins, and you look at the fact that they have nothing on the payroll for next year, and you could spend and actually add a couple pieces here or there and still be well under any normal payroll in Major League Baseball. Yeah. It almost gives them a little bit more leverage too, because you've got to make me do this. Because at the end of the day, we got him for 2 more years, and I don't think teams believe that right now. I think teams still assume he's going to be traded. That's why you have Mets media members asking Mets players what it's like to potentially, what it would be like to acquire him after you just faced him, which is bizarre. And you've got national TV games for the Cubs where they're talking about Justin Steele going down, and then they have a whole piece on Sandy. It's bizarre. And I think that just shows you kind of the way the outside is looking at it. So the more that you can quell that narrative a little bit, the more leverage you have too. And I do agree though, Isaac, at that point, it may actually be real posturing at the same time. If a Dodgers or Mariners, another pitcher goes down, or one of these loaded farm systems gets desperate, this is a trade that a GM can make and know that it's not going to cost him his job, because even if you overpay for Sandy, he's going to give you innings at a low 4s, worst case scenario, and he's going to be a really solid pitcher. And that's the worst case scenario. So I think GMs could be a little bit more willing to take a chance here, because you don't want to have that trade that hangs over your head that it's oh, he made that move and it set us back. I don't think any GM is going to be afraid about making a Sandy trade that sets you back, because I think the only thing that makes that trade not work is injury, and that's not something that's going to, hurt a front office member's, credibility.
Now, Carver, I want to hear from you on this situation with Sandy. What would you do? How would you even handle it? And maybe, again, like Ara mentioned with the optics, it just seems like people are just waiting for the Marlins to do it, not just win, but when is it going to happen? Not if it's going to happen, to win.
Yeah, I would be on the side of trading him sooner rather than later if they're going to pull the plug on this. It would be very unpopular amongst fans, as we all know, but the Marlins, I don't think are – not that they're not worried about that, but that stone's already kind of cast. They're already not very popular with the fans anyways, and I think that the longer you wait, yes, Sandy's going to be good, I think, and no matter what year he's pitching, and you can make the argument that he would probably be at his best in a contract year. I think Sandy's that kind of guy, but – you lose value in a potential trade if you trade a guy in a contract year or closer to a contract year. So I would probably try to maximize value on what will be their best trade chip we've ever seen, in trading this pitcher as soon as possible.
Agreed.
I mean, they traded some big name players. They traded Miguel Cabrera. Like, they traded Hall of Famers. We know it. Sandy is on that trajectory, I think. But I think this could be the biggest name that they've traded in franchise history. You need to maximize value on that. You need that blue chip prospect. The Marlins haven't had that blue chip prospect. You can make the argument for Thomas White, but before him and the rest of this system right now, the Marlins haven't had that blue chip definite slam dunk prospect in a long time. So if you can get that and you're staring that ability in the face, you have to do it sooner rather than later.